Now
on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
Good morning. It is 5:07, thereabouts, 5:06 on News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. Thanks for letting us be a part of your Monday morning in the nation's capital. Coming up, Joe DeGenova. So much to talk about with Joe at 7:05. He will cover the legal news of the day, including that Daniel Penny ruling that we're all watching. At 7:35, Jonathan Schanzer, Senior Vice President for Research at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. He'll tell us all about the latest news out of Syria and Assad, who appears to have fled to Russia. At 8:05, Zach Smith with the Heritage Foundation. He'll tell us about a big problem in D.C., metro fare evasion to the tune of $50 million. It's a big deal. At 8:35, Luke Rosiak, investigative reporter at the Daily Wire. He'll tell us about the debate over DOGE. I love saying DOGE, pushing to make federal workers return to work. That is a heated debate here in D.C. I'm Julie Gunlock alongside my friend Hans von Spakovsky, the manager of the Election Law Reform Initiative at the Heritage Foundation, and he's a former member of the Federal Election Commission, also a former member of the Fulton County Board of Registration and Elections. Hans, what a bio.
Did you have to mention that last one?
Well, thanks for coming in. We are sitting in for Larry O'Connor. He's on a vacation, so we're going to do our best to talk about these important issues. And one of the issues that we want to talk about is Laura Trump, currently the Republican National Committee chair,
Right.
although I think maybe there was some news I saw on Twitter that she might have resigned that position. But Laura Trump pointing out a few ways that the electoral process could be streamlined nationally. And the reason for this would be to sort of restore faith in elections. You are obviously the expert on this. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, part of what she was talking about was, about half the states require an ID. Then you have places like California where they just passed a law saying you're engaging in a criminal violation if you ask somebody for an ID as an election official. And, she's right. That kind of inconsistency is a real problem. Plus, we have a federal law setting the date for the federal election in November, and yet we now have people like in Virginia, they start voting 45 days before Election Day, which makes no sense.
I want to hear what she had to say. She was actually interviewing with our own Mark Levin about what we should do about this. So let's just really quickly hear what she had to say, and I'll get your reaction. Cut one.
Can the Republicans do when you have votes that just keep going on and on and on for a month? And then you lose Orange County, you lose other parts of Central California with these counting. I guess they're voter harvesting. I don't know what they're doing. I mean, everybody's used to things happening right away. Why does it take a month to count? Is that a congressional Republican thing? Who's responsible for overseeing that sort of thing?
Well, yeah, I do think it falls maybe on the NRCC to a certain extent. But I think there's a bigger conversation maybe to be had. We actually never let our lawyers leave any of these places where vote counts were going well past Election Day. I got a lot of messages on X, a lot of people wondering, are you guys still watching? Yes, we were still watching in Arizona, in California, anywhere that there were votes still being counted. We were there. We had our team there. We never let them leave. You saw how important, by the way, Mark, that was in a place like Bucks County, where they tried to get cute in Pennsylvania, of course, and other places in Pennsylvania with Dave McCormick. But that said, I think the bigger conversation maybe is how do we want to conduct elections in the United States of America? Is it fair to say, half of the states are going to use voter ID laws, half of them aren't, half of them are going to start counting mail-in ballots before, Election Day, half of them will start on Election Day. It obviously, as it exists now, is a state-by-state law, and each state gets to determine how they conduct their electoral process. But I do think in the wake of 2020, there were so many people who had so many questions about it. And I'll tell you, we went above and beyond this election because we didn't want to leave anything to chance. Even if it was a rogue machine in Kentucky that had some sort of malfunction where somebody was pushing Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and it was casting a vote for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, we aren't concerned about Kentucky. But guess what? we had to send a team there because we wanted every single person across the country to understand we were watching.
So, very compelling argument here. But what do you say to people who think we don't want to nationalize elections? This is a state's role, and states should be allowed to make its own rules. I agree. Those rules have gotten insane. Let's let illegal aliens vote. I mean, I get it. But what would your response be to that?
My response is it's a combination. And so, for example, what we were talking about just before, federal law sets the date for federal elections. It's a particular day in November, as we all know, right? So if you're a state like California that is allowing absentee ballots to come in after Election Day, you're violating that federal law, okay? So, yeah, you may be able as a state to set certain rules for absentee ballots, but you can't set a rule that violates that federal requirement. And that's the way you look at all of these. Moreover, if you're a state that allows early voting 2 months before Election Day, again, you're violating that federal law that says the day for federal elections is that particular day in November. So it's a combination of the states and the feds, and the feds have not been enforcing those kind of provisions.
Well, this is, again, it seems like common sense reforms. What will the opposition be?
Well, it is common sense to everybody except the leaders of the Democratic Party and the heads of all these radical left-wing advocacy groups who are against just basic stuff like requiring an ID to vote, which the last time I saw it, Julie, 83% of Americans say, well, of course you should show an ID.
Right. And it's interesting watching the Democrats respond to that. It's so racist, some of the things that they say about, well, black people can't get an ID or they don't know how to use a Xerox. I believe Kamala Harris has repeated some of those ridiculous statements about people of color in this country and their inability to get an ID. So, that's really what it boils down to.
It is the most patronizingly racist attitude I have ever seen. And this is the Democratic Party, which claims that it's the best representative for African Americans. The dismissive attitude it's the leadership has.
What's also so galling is that these are the same people. For instance, Kristen Walker this weekend on Meet the Press was asking President-elect Trump again about the 2020 election. They're so concerned about election integrity, and then when you bring up ideas like what Laura Trump has laid out here, oh no, that's a bridge too far.
Oh yeah, it's just not needed because there's no problems, right?
Right. But do you think that this will happen? Do you think there's an appetite for this? And will there be any bipartisan support for this?
Unfortunately, I don't think there'll be bipartisan support in terms of the Democratic Party leadership. But the constituency, the Democratic Party, the polling shows they want things like voter ID requirements. Yeah.
Well, anyway, we'll have more on this. It is 5:15.
WMAL. Making sense of the news. Live from the Home Paramount Pest Control Studios.
Home Paramount, the leader in pest control since 1939.
So more on elections with Heritage Foundation Hans von Spakovsky, the election guru in Washington. Interesting line of questioning from some of the weekend shows. Kristen Welker from Meet the Press asking about birthright citizenship. I want you to listen to this clip because certain words were left out, but let's listen to cut 2 on how Trump is basically saying he will end birthright citizenship on day 1.
You've promised to end birthright citizenship on day 1. Is that still your plan?
Yeah, absolutely.
The 14th Amendment, though, says that, quote, all persons born in the United States are citizens. Can you get around the 14th Amendment with an executive action?
We're going to have to get a change. We'll maybe have to go back to the people, but we have to end it. We're the only country that has it.
Through an executive action?
We're the only country that has it. Do you know, if somebody sets a foot, just a foot, 1 foot, you don't need 2, on our land, congratulations, you are now a citizen of the United States of America. Yes, we're going to end that because it's ridiculous.
Through executive action?
Well, if we can, through executive action. I was going to do it through executive action, but then we had to fix COVID first, to be honest with you. We have to end it.
Hans, she tell us a little bit about first of all, what is birthright citizenship? Let's go over this.
The idea is that if you're born in the U.S., even if you're here, your parents are here illegally, that you're supposedly a citizen. But she left out the crucial second part of the 14th Amendment, which says, born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And what that means, I actually went back and looked at the debates about the 14th Amendment. And what that actually means from that time period is that you owe no political allegiance to anyone other than the United States. And what that means is, look, if you're born in this country to parents who are here illegally from Mexico, they're Mexican citizens, and you, as their son or daughter, you owe your political allegiance not to the U.S. government, but to Mexico. Birthright citizenship was never recognized in the U.S. until around the 1960s, when the State Department suddenly started changing its policy on this. Listen, in the 1920s, Congress passed a law making American Indians citizens of the United States. If birthright citizenship had been the rule, they wouldn't have had to pass that law. Right.
So, okay, then is it necessary that anything be done? I mean, he's talking about we'll have to go back to the states and we'll have to...
No, it doesn't need to be changed legally because the 14th Amendment does not provide for birthright citizenship. Now, some people disagree with that, but that is a wrong interpretation of the 14th Amendment based on its history. What should happen is the president comes in, he tells the State Department, from now on, you will not issue passports to individuals unless when they were born in the U.S., at least one of their parents was a U.S. citizen. He'll get sued. It'll go all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. The Supreme Court will then say, well, this is the proper interpretation of the 14th Amendment. That's the way it's done.
Okay, so at first he'll do it through executive order.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Well, this will be a fight, though, and there will be claims of racism. It'll be the same place.
Has nothing to do with racism whatsoever. He was right. There's almost no country in the world that recognizes birthright citizenship. I think Australia used to, and it was so abused that they got rid of it.
Well, again, this has been abused, and Americans are really fed up. I think polling has shown that. The election showed that, for goodness sake. So this will be a popular act if Trump does indeed do this. Has there been any precedent on this? Has there been any other lawsuits on this before?
Not on this issue. Although this has become so abused that just a couple of years ago, the U.S. Justice Department actually criminally indicted all these series of travel agents in California who specialized in bringing Chinese women to the United States for the sole purpose of being able to give birth here so that their children would be citizens and they could then use that to get into the United States permanently.
Oh, good grief.
Criminally indicted them. And they were making huge amounts of money. And the people they were bringing in were well-connected members of the Chinese Communist Party and their government and elsewhere. They were getting a foothold in the United States.
Well, this is also quite lucrative for the cartels and the coyotes who bring in people from Mexico and other countries. I mean, my goodness, we know that people are flying here from European countries and from Asian countries and landing in Mexico and then walking across the border, often paying cartels to bring them in. And then the idea is, if you have a child, and then it goes to the Democrats' talking point about how are you going to separate these families, right? When the children have citizenship, perhaps, and the parents don't. So,
look, Julia, ridiculous of this is just think of it this way: if Vladimir Putin were to come to the United States with let's say a new wife, and they're in the Russian embassy, and his wife has a child here. The way liberals view it, that child should be a U.S. citizen. Yeah, right. I mean, that makes no sense whatsoever, does it?
Right. No. And again, as Trump said, no other country has this benefit.
Right.
Has this...
Like I said, it's a misinterpretation. It's only happened in in recent decades, really since the 1960s, and before that, everybody realized that there's no such thing.
Well,
as
I do.
birthright
I
citizenship.
also think that this is going to be an education process. We have
It is.
to be. I mean, I'm a little embarrassed to say I didn't know this. I learned this over the weekend when I saw this great thread from Senator Mike Lee talking to you, and a few other people on Twitter were saying this is and of course, Welker's question. She literally left out the most important part.
That's right.
Of that, because they know that this is going to be challenged. So anyway, thank you for that, Hans. We'll have more on this and many other things. It is 5:23
now
on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
Good Monday morning to you. It is 5:37 on News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. Thanks for letting us be a part of your morning in the nation's capital. Coming up, we'll talk to Joe DeGenova at 7:05. Of course, he'll cover the legal news of the day. At 7:35, Jonathan Schanzer. He's the Senior Vice President for Research at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. He'll give us the latest out of Syria. At 8:05, Zach Smith. He's with the Heritage Foundation. He'll tell us about a big problem in D.C., metro fare evasion to the tune of $50 million. Jeez. And at 8:35, our friend Luke Rosiak, investigative reporter at the Daily Wire, he'll tell us about the debate over DOGE pushing to make federal workers return to work. That's a hot button issue in this area. I'm Julie Gunlock, in for Larry O'Connor alongside Hans von Spakovsky, the manager of the Election Law Reform Initiative at the Heritage Foundation. Good morning, Hans.
Good morning, Drew. You're a real glutton for punishment that you invited me back to co-host with you again.
Well, I am thrilled you're here because there is so much election news. There's a lot of legal news, and I definitely need help in those areas. So it's great to have you with us. I want to pivot over to the Daniel Penny case in New York. This is a case that was brought by Soros prosecutor Alvin Bragg. And for those who aren't paying attention, Penny was a 25-year-old Marine. He is a 25-year-old Marine, former Marine. He put Neely, who was a 30-year-old homeless man, in a chokehold after Neely boarded a subway car. He was acting totally erratically. He was, as Penny's attorneys called Neely, insanely threatening, and he was. Now, Neely then died. And the medical examiner concluded Penny's chokehold killed Neely, although they later found
that wasn't true.
That wasn't true.
Right.
He was initially charged with both manslaughter and negligent homicide charges. He pleaded not guilty to both. The jury, by Tuesday, the jury had been deliberating for 23 hours. And then on Friday, the jury sent 2 notes repeating that they could not come to a unanimous conclusion on the second-degree manslaughter count, which is the more serious count.
That's right. They were deadlocked.
They were deadlocked, and then the judge gave the jury an Allen charge, which you're going to explain. Give us sort of the overview here, what happened, because essentially the judge then told the jury, well, you can still deliberate on the lesser charge.
Which he shouldn't have done.
Which is unprecedented. I mean, this is...
That's right.
Okay, so...
This is just so typical. Look, first
so
of all,
embarrassing.
This case should never have been brought.
Right.
Alvin Bragg is a
there.
guy who over 50% of the felonies in the city, he just doesn't prosecute.
Right.
And this guy, Daniel Penny, look, he was being a good Samaritan. He was trying to protect... all the witnesses agree. He was trying to protect them from this... frankly, crazy guy who was threatening everyone in there. The fact that he died was not the result of what Penny was doing. This case should never have been brought. So the judge had said at the beginning, you can't consider the lesser charge, which is negligent, but basically negligent manslaughter. You can't consider it unless you find he was innocent of the higher charge, which was manslaughter. And to find him guilty of manslaughter, they had to conclude that Penny was acting in a reckless manner, which he clearly was not.
No, he was very controlled.
And then what does the judge do? Instead of when the jury's deadlocked, instead of dismissing it the way he should have, he suddenly changes the rules in the middle of the game. Does that sound familiar?
Yes.
Changing the rules in the middle of the game and saying, well, yeah, maybe I said before you could only if you found him innocent on that, could you acquit him on that? Could you then consider the lesser charge? No, the judge suddenly says, well, you're deadlocked on it, but I'm going to have you come back Monday and consider the lesser charge.
So, meanwhile, also, the prosecutor in charge of the case, a woman, I can't remember her name, but she repeatedly referred to Daniel Penny as the white guy.
Oh, yeah. This is a racist. Talk about racism. That's what's going on in this case.
Against Daniel Penny.
Against Daniel Penny, yeah.
Yes. I mean, there's so much wickedness involving in this case. The latest is that Neely's father, this is the crazy man, the homeless man,
right,
who got on that subway car and started threatening people and harassing people. His father, who took no notice of this young man, this troubled young man, has filed a civil suit against Daniel Penny, trying to get money out of this case. Right. It's absolutely disgusting. Again, a man who wanted nothing to do with his son prior.
Yeah, he wants to profit off this financially, and Alvin Bragg is trying to profit off this politically because he thinks this helps him with the voters in New York City, and it ought to do the exact opposite.
So you have, again, for this lesser charge, is this the one where they have to show that he acted recklessly?
Well, that was in the first one.
Okay.
In this one, again, it just shouldn't. The charges shouldn't be there. They have to show that he was negligent in what he was doing.
But it's interesting because there's evidence that Penny moved Neely, the homeless man, into a position that would make his breathing easier.
That's right. He relaxed the hold because he had gotten him under control. And again, all of the circumstances of this show that he was acting as a good Samaritan. That is exactly what it was. He was acting as a good Samaritan, and yet Alvin Bragg charges him anyway. Look, we shouldn't be surprised to remember this is the same prosecutor who made up imaginary criminal charges against Donald Trump.
Yes.
And brought them there too.
Yes. There is, obviously, this is embarrassing for the American court system. This is embarrassing American judicial system. But there is a societal cost to this too. And as a woman, this is the kind of thing that is going to convey to young men, to men, period, don't help. Don't help.
Right.
Sit back, because if you help, you're going to get Daniel Pennied. That's what's going to happen. And so we're going to have a situation where, and I mean, I think this is conveyed nationwide to men all across the country, not just in New York, not just in these sort of deep blue cities where there are Soros prosecutors, but nationwide. This conveys to young men and men in general, don't help vulnerable people. Let it happen because it's not worth the risk. I mean, Daniel Penny, if he doesn't go to jail, he now will face a civil trial with this Neely father. His life is upended.
His life has been in total suspension. Think of the amount of money he's been spending on attorneys. You're right. This takes us back. It's like Alvin Bragg and others want to take us back and put us in the same position as the infamous incident. Remember the 1960s where the woman was being attacked in the street?
Yes,
All
screaming.
All the neighbors
Famous.
heard, and no one wanted to get involved.
Yeah. Listen, we've got more on this, and we'll talk to Joe DeGeneva about it. It is 5:44.
WMAL, making sense of the forecast. Because you never know what Mother Nature has in store. Download the WMAL app to stream us for free.
You know, Hans, years ago, I guess almost 18 years ago, I started working from home. My other job, I work for the Independent Women's Forum, and years and years ago, they switched to a work from home format. And it's a lot of women who have kids and love that kind of way of working. They love the flexibility. But it used to be rare. We were sort of a rare case of a company that worked entirely from home. Now it seems like the entire federal government is working from home. And DOGE wants to bring that to an end. And we will talk to Luke Rosiak. He's coming up at 8:35 to talk more about this. Luke Rosiak has really some interesting figures. He says 94% of feds are still working from home. The EPA had poisonous water in its headquarters because it was sitting in the pipes stagnant from disuse. He says USDA inspectors claim they inspect food facilities for safety issues from home. So has the work from home thing gone too far, Hans?
Yes. Although I have to say, look, I think it's gone too far. I think federal employees ought to be in their offices working. Although if they're successful and they make federal employees actually go to work, Eileen Whalen's job is going to be a lot worse in terms of the traffic coming in and out of D.C. But look, I actually know someone who took over a particular office in a federal agency, I won't mention who, called a meeting.
You can just tell us.
Call a meeting. It was the Justice Department. Called a meeting of the 20 senior managers, and nobody showed up because they're all working from home.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, but that is not the way you're going to have an efficient, well-run government.
Well, it's funny. I do struggle because I also think that work from home scenarios, situations, do provide, for instance, it's sort of family friendly, right? And it also can save money, right? And it can also serve as a sort of a way to recruit sort of the best and brightest because it's a benefit. And so do you think it's going to be just a wholesale call back to the office, or will they be more strategic about it?
No, I think they should be more strategic about it. And yeah, there are exceptions. There are people who should be able to work remotely, but the entire workforce of the federal government, there's just no way they can get their jobs done. I don't believe with that kind of a situation.
There really are some amazing facts, and again, we will talk to Luke Rosiak about it. He wrote about this at the Daily Wire. Only 6% of federal employees work from an office full time. 6%, and a third are fully remote. Just 3% of federal workforce telework daily prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. Today, 6% of workers report in person. So again, this is definitely a COVID thing, and
well, that's what led to them doing it. But look, Look, Julie, you and I both know that's just one of the many problems this new agency is going to have to deal with. I mean, to tell you how ridiculously bloated the federal government is, as I understand it, there are more people now employed, federal employees, inside the Department of Agriculture than there are farmers in the United States. And that is a ridiculous situation.
One thing that's going to be really interesting is DOGE is going to reveal a lot of these things that have been kept secret in Washington. It's a big, dirty secret in Washington, right? What did they discover recently? There's almost 500 federal agencies. What in the world? 500 federal agencies and all of these employees who, I love this. Even the head of the General Services Administration, if you don't know what GSA does, they manage all these federal properties and things like the furniture that's in these buildings, right? I remember when you needed something, you had to contact GSA, right? Even the head of the General Services Administration, which again manages federal real estate, works from home in Missouri. So, yeah, maybe we need to look into that. Again, we'll talk more about this at 8:35. Right now, it is 5:53 on O'Connor and Company.